able to do. And so not a lot happened then. And then I wrote a poem imagining that my muse was this emigre poet named Vladislav Khadasievich, who was kind of a nobody back in Russia. He was a second-rank or third-rank symbolist, although he was younger than most of those guys. And then in emigration, wrote many fewer poems, but they were really much better, very, very good. And he was kind of skinny and tubercular and gradually got into worse and worse health and was writing less and less. And imagining him as my muse, just saying, please give me a breath of air, even if it's full of cigarette smoke. I'm dying over here, and what are you doing over there? And so that felt like a really good expression of, I don't know, talking yourself into a place where other things seem more important, and then finally realizing, no, I do have to make space for this, even if I'm playing scales, right? Even if I'm just keeping myself ready for.
You would mention cicadas,
yeah.
And you have a cicada poem.
I have a cicada poem. Well, the cicada is the pretext. So if you get an idea, right, it's this little thing, and then what happens. But this one is good. We were just saying that cicadas were out for a while because everybody wrote about them, but this one's good because it's just the pretext. And I guess the title would be Cicada. Mandelstam's citation cicada is a sign of Crimea. You don't get cicadas in Petrograd, and surely there'd been none in Warsaw. I can imagine the impact of going south to hang out with the poets, and of first hearing that maraca sound, its mechanical persistence. This, along with the wormwood and the olive trees, it must have been what John Henry Duchendorf felt when he first hit Colorado. Though, as I recall, we had all kinds of grasshoppers, but no cicadas. This morning, here in Pennsylvania, they're scraping out their white noise in bunches, definitely white, not gray or pink, with an edge of splashing water, which would be precious in Colorado or Crimea. The waves of sound roll from tree to tree, enthusiastic chorus, psyched by one another or trying to outshout. Last night, it seemed to be a single energetic specimen right outside my bedroom window, scratching out his hoarse brown clatter, just the color of a board, sawn but not yet planed or sanded. Oh no, I thought. It keeps pausing and then starting up again. I'll never get to sleep with this noise in my ear. Like a line of poetry, I'm trying but keep failing to forget.
So that's different. That is not your ordinary garden
cicada.
Variety cicada poem.
Well, that one feels to me better than playing scales, right? But you don't get that. On the other hand, if you write 2 or 3 poems a day, you can have a lot of compost.
Is that a more recent poem, or is that an older?
Yeah, that was I think July 15th.
Just on the grounds of hearing that poem,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like you have an affinity for nature.
Yeah, sure. I like it very much. And I particularly like just walking around seeing things. I'm looking through the window here, loving the fact that the glass is old and it has ripples in it, and that because of my cataract surgery and my contact lens, so I have a bionic eye and a prosthetic eye, everything is really clear and I can see the little ripples moving over the leaves. So it's sometimes just visual games with nature. It's not necessarily being able to tell what kind of tree that is.
And nature certainly plays a role in your poems.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And nature would be one of the things that, if it comes into a poem, gives it more gravity, like a classical reference or like a reference to another poet or like some important element from world history. Well, I can't think where I would go with it. Whereas the cicada is a quote from a poem by Mandelstam where he says, cicada, citata. So cicada, the cicada, and then citata is the citation or the quote. So the idea that the quote keeps sounding in the poem like the cicada, and they call to each other, right? So that, again, you imagine Crimea, which was this very hot, still is I'm sure, hot, dry place, and you would get the cicadas up in the trees calling to each other, especially if you caught one of the years when there's a lot of them out of the ground. So you hear Ovid. So Ovid is big for Mandelstam. Ovid, who was exiled to somewhere around the Black Sea. The idea that Ovid is still resounding here, right? That sounds come up out of the ground. That, to me, gave the poem more gravity even before I sat down to write it.
Your journal, which, as you were paging through it, you have so much in there, and as Connie said, it's incredibly neat.
I don't know
But
whether it would be legible.
how long have you been journaling?
I started when I was writing in my journal when I was 12 or 13 in the beginning, and I was using a number 2 pencil, and it turns out if you write in a number 2 pencil, it just rubs off and then you have pages with nothing visible. And then I discovered the little tiny fountain pens that Schaefer was still making, which I think cost $1.50. You would get a little fountain pen and 2 blue ink cartridges, and they were still for sale when I was sort of in junior high school, moving into high school. So I used those for a long time, and then later they quit making them, or at least they weren't available any longer, and I got a couple of fountain pens and lost them, and then finally came back around and got some more fountain pens. So I'm in a moment where I have fountain pens with all different colors. But I have to say about journals, the top binding is really not good. You want side binding so that you can, Connie, you suggested just starting at the top and writing down. If I had thought of that, it would have been a completely different experience. Yeah, but I didn't think of it.
Yeah.
I've got like 5 pages left in this one, so I'm just gonna suck it up.
What is the difference between journaling and writing in a diary?
Oh, very good question. I would say that my journal is much more like a diary, but I use it for talking about things I want to work on, which would be different from a diary, and then writing drafts of poetry. I don't do translation in the journal, although sometimes I'll think, okay, it's time to write in Russian a bit, so that I, kind of pull up my proficiency. So I would say, I don't know, really they overlap a lot. And the words even mean the same thing, right? Diary is from dia, meaning a day, and journal is from the French for jour, right, meaning a day, like soup de jour. So a diary and a journal are just the same thing. But journaling, I think, now has a practice, and you can take a class in journaling, and certainly I use mine for some of the purposes that a class would teach you. I know people in business or people who are entrepreneurs will use a journal to write, your bullet journal. You write in the dots and put your plans in and see what's going to happen, and that would be a good way to organize. Writing it with your hand is quite different from typing.
Oh, yeah.
Although I really want to have, I didn't always do this. There was a time when I was typing a lot on the computer, and then I would go back and I would work on the drafts, and I would file things away in okay, this wasn't so great folder, and then maybe this will be good folder. And when I was 34 years old, or 33, almost 34, I finished my first year of teaching at Swarthmore, and one of my colleagues, who's just a wonderful, wonderful poet, somehow let me know that the Yale Younger Poets Prize competition was coming due. So I sent off a sheaf of my stuff to the Yale Younger Poets Prize and got back a very nice letter from them saying, you should apply again. And I thought, okay, they send this to everybody, and I didn't apply again, and you have to be 35 or under, so that was it. I'd blown my chance. And I don't know, has any of you applied to the Yale Younger Poets? I don't know whether they really
Too late.
Send a nice letter. Anyone watching who's under 35, be aware.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been the under 35 group.
So I don't know, maybe I should have really just pulled myself together and resubmitted the following year, but that was it, that was my chance.
Do you send a lot of stuff out?
I don't, no, and there are 2 reasons for that, and one is just being too busy, and the other is I had a good friend, sort of mid-1990s, who had just started a tenure-track job in English, where part of her work was teaching creative writing and publishing poetry, and she said, Sibelan, why are you sending stuff out? You're just clogging the airwaves for those of us who need to publish. And so I stopped. I thought, okay, she's right? When I'll feel bad now if anything gets accepted.
Wow.
And she got tenure and it's all good, but I didn't get into the habit again. And I know some of the poets in our community are very good about sending stuff out. And I have sometimes sent stuff out. I have a couple of things in the Schuylkill Valley Journal from a while ago, and Apiary, that really nice journal in Philadelphia, a couple of things in that. I put a lot of my poetry on a page on my homepage at the college, and then there was a moment around 2006 where I thought, maybe I do want to publish some of this stuff. So I stopped putting it online, but still wasn't sending it out. I feared that if it was online, they would say this has been published already, even though it was your own kind of self-made, wickerwork publication job.
It's interesting that the last poet we had interviewed, Lisa Devano, was saying that she doesn't send her stuff out very much either. I'm beginning to think that maybe more poets don't than I originally thought.
Yeah, I met Daisy Freed, who works in Philly and is a wonderful, wonderful poet, and I took a workshop with her, and she's significantly younger than I am, although no longer under 35 and beginning by any means at all. And I realized there's something about becoming engaged as a professional poet and probably about teaching creative writing where it's important that you do continue to produce and to send out and to have your own idea about how your poetry is developing and to have an idea about how, what do you do to make yourself write, which we should come back to and talk about because that's such an interesting topic. I'd like to know what you do, and I'd like to, speculate about what people can do. But if you're really engaged with poets and poetry and going to the readings, particularly when someone important comes and buying Jeffrey Hill's posthumous volume because he's important and you need to know it, that makes you different from a Russian professor who's just sort of, fiddling around and playing scales. My story about Tsvetaeva having her daughter die in a children's home partly because all she knew how to do was be a poet. She'd grown up in a rich, relatively wealthy family and just didn't have any, even editing or something, even translating, which she did some of. She'd never done professionally until much later. Right? Those are all stories, but really I think just having your life on a slightly different trajectory. I know some people retire and then flower as poets, and maybe I'll get to do that. That would be a nice thing.
You were mentioning about poetry online.
Yeah.
Have you gotten involved at all with that?
Not a whole lot. No, I have, as I said, if you go to my homepage, which is, you just Google me and it's one of the top hits. The homepage, it's at Swarthmore College, and there's a link where you can go and see a whole lot of poems up to about 2006 that I thought were worth putting up. And so year by year, and there's also a big alphabetical list of all of them. If you heard me read one and you want to see it, that kind of thing, or just browse around. And when I first started putting them up, it was 1996, 1997, 1988. There wasn't that much poetry online. There wasn't that much online. And I guess that's a little bit of technical expertise I picked up early, although I've stayed at the level of a 1990s webpage and everything is really fancy. It's a very plain looking webpage, but I would get notes out of nowhere from somebody who'd just come across it on a search for something and say, oh, this is really great, but that hasn't happened in a long time. I think, again, that type of open, searchable, very simple, nothing flashing, no ads, no things that if you click I get a commission. I haven't heard from anybody about that for a very long time. Although every now and then I'll hear about the main homepage. At the bottom I put my address. It says send flowers and expensive chocolates to. And it has my address. And I was going to take that down, and some graduate student, or someone I met as a graduate student, told me, no, leave that there because people know if they write to you, you're not going to bite their head off. That they can see you have a sense of humor because no one's going to send expensive chocolates.
Have you ever gotten any expensive chocolates?
Actually, one time, this is again 1996 or 7, a guy sent me a little package of Drost chocolates, which aren't like super expensive, but they're also not Hershey's. So it's very nice. Yeah, it was very nice because he said he'd enjoyed them and thought it was funny. It was mainly thought it was funny to say.
You should have asked for something.
That's your diamond. A kiss on the hand, maybe white continental.